in the Zoom session. First of all, I believe motivation is an extremely important topic when we think about the whole concept of leadership and management skills. And the reason I think it's important is because I step back and say, why do we study topics like this? Or why do we study topics like we're studying in this whole course? It goes back to the big question is, what do organizations want from employees? The organization you work for, what does it really want? And I believe it wants two things out of people: performance and high performance, and commitment. And I use the word commitment, not loyalty. What commitment means is that you're going to work in the best interest of the company for as long as you're there, and you're going to perform at a high level. So it's important to understand concepts like motivation and things like that in order to understand the importance of these concepts around motivation and interpersonal behavior when you're talking about leadership and motivation. So when we talk about motivation, we talk about it because it leads to performance. And it leads to performance if you believe you have the ability to do the job and the environment you're working in is conducive to you performing. And so a lot of what I'm talking about tonight has to do with motivation as it leads to performance. And if you get certain outcomes from your performance, that is what's going to lead to satisfaction and commitment on your part to the organization. So I think the issue is around poor performance in an organization. If someone is not performing well, one of the questions you have to ask yourself is, how difficult are the tasks and how capable is the person? Or how hard is the individual trying to work? Or is the person improving? In other words, if you have an employee or a person who's not performing, your very first question is, am I dealing with an ability problem or an attitude problem? Whatever it is requires a different response. If it's an ability problem, it's a totally different response for you to make as a leader than if it's an attitude problem. The word motivation comes from the Latin word to move. And so if I asked you to do something and you do it, you're moving in a certain direction to do what I want. And also, I hope, if you do what I want, you're going to do it with a lot of intensity and a lot of persistence. In other words, you're going to stick with it until the job's done. So when we look at this concept of motivation and what I'm talking about tonight, we're looking at motivation leading to performance. And with that performance, there are certain outcomes. And those outcomes either lead to satisfaction or not. So performance is the product of our ability multiplied by our motivation. And so those are just some general ideas on motivation and importance. So an important theory in all this, when we think about, basically we step back a minute. Tonight I'm going to talk about 4 basic theories of motivation. And the chapter in the textbook talks about these 4 theories. They don't specify them, but I think these 4 theories, to me, help explain about 99% of motivational issues in an organization. The first one is called the expectancy theory. Basically what it says is, I am going to put effort out to perform if I think I'm going to get certain outcomes that have value to me. Let me unpack that a minute. So before we perform something, before I put any effort out, I have to believe I can do the job. Or do I have confidence in myself? Do I believe I have the abilities to do it? So we're talking about an ability or motivational issues when we get into this. If I don't believe I have the ability to it, I'm probably not going to exert much effort. But if I do exert effort, the question I ask, will I perform and receive certain outcomes? And if I get certain outcomes, do they have value for me? Are they satisfying? So I might get pay, I might get recognition, I might get satisfaction, I might get a sense of achievement, I might have certain needs satisfied. How much value do these have for me? And I think if you asked yourself, this model would help explain a lot about our behavior. And it's called an expectancy theory. And basically, it all begins with self-efficacy. Well, do I believe that I can do something? Do I look at past accomplishments? Or maybe I learn from looking at other people or seeing other people do something. And I feel, yeah, if they can do it, I can do it. Maybe I have a boss or someone else giving me verbal cues and telling me how to do it. Think of a coach in football giving a halftime speech. And all of these lead to a sense of self-efficacy and performance. And this model explains me getting certain needs. If you studied management courses before, when you talked about motivation, and many of you have heard of Maslow's pyramid of needs or hierarchy of needs, and they were like psychological safety, love, belongingness, autonomy, all the way up to self-actualization. And a lot of theories in the past that you've studied about motivation really focused on looking at needs and need satisfaction. Well, what needs are really the outcome of doing something, the outcome we get. So I don't talk about see motivation from that point of view. I think it's a narrow view of thinking about motivation. And then some other outcomes that you can get in that expectancy theory, pay, bonuses, promotions, support, a lot of different things. You can also get negative outcomes, and you might be motivated to do something so you won't be fired or demoted or something. So let's look back at the model a minute. Again, effort, performance leads to outcomes, hopefully, that are satisfying. So I want you to think for a minute, let's say I offered you $1,500 to help me with a project on a Saturday morning. 3 hours work, I'm going to pay you $1,500. Would you be motivated to help me? And you think about it for yourself. Would you answer that yes or no? And for $1,500 for 3 hours work, on a scale of 0 to 10, how hard do you think you would work? So think about what your answer is going to be there. I'll give you a minute to think about that. But let's say you discovered that I made the same offer, but for $2,000 to another member of your class to do the same project. So you just found out, I'm going to pay someone else $2,000, same thing. Now, based on this new information, Would you still want to do the project for $1,500? But then ask yourself, what would it do to your intensity level or your effort level? I will say in the class, most people, this number went down from 8 or 9 to 5 or 6. So expectancy theory doesn't explain everything about motivation. We also have a sense of fairness involved, and that's equity theory. So you finding out that I offered someone else $2,000 just doesn't seem fair to you. So here's what this theory says. You take a look at your inputs into something, and you look at your outcomes that you get out of your inputs. And you compare yourself with somebody else and their inputs and outputs. And if in your perception it's equal, you're in a state of equilibrium and you're feeling okay. But what happens if you look at your inputs and outcomes and it's less than someone else doing the same exact? In other words, someone who has the same inputs as you is getting better outcomes. What kind of actions do you take? You're not in equilibrium. You don't feel things are fair. And the theory would say you have to bring yourself back into a state of equilibrium. So what you might do is you might go to your boss and say, hey, they're getting an unfair advantage. Or if it's pretty bad, you might quit your job. Or you might say, well, let me reevaluate it. They're here longer than me, so maybe they deserve more. That's a rationalization. Or maybe you would do less work. Well, I'm not staying around here till 7 every night. I'm going to be leaving at 5:30 with everyone else. But you could be out of equilibrium the other way, where you're getting more. You're like being overcompensated relative to other people. And you might feel guilty about that. What might you do? Well, maybe you'll do nothing, and you might say to yourself, well, all's fair in love and war. That's a rationalization. Or you might say, well, they're paying me more, I should work harder. You might try and work harder. You might try and help them and get their pay increased. All that this theory says is you want to bring yourself into a state of equilibrium. This theory is pretty simple, but it's very understandable. I really think this goes to the heart of how we believe as human beings. We want to see things from a point of view of fairness, and we look at the world from this point of view. You know that you do it, and you know that people that work with you do it. So this second theory is equity theory, and here are some of the outcomes and inputs that are considered by this equity theory. Again, they're kind of similar to the needs theory. The next theory, just to talk about a little bit, is goal setting. Back when I was in an MBA program in the late 70s, there was a big theory going around called MBO, which was management by objectives. And there were tons of management bestsellers, and there were hundreds of consultants going around the country. Everyone was talking about management by objectives and goal setting. Basically, the theory was it started at the top with strategic planning and goals, and everyone down the organization set goals that were aligned with the level above them and all the way down to the individual. And if everyone in the organization set the appropriate goals, then organizations would function well. And this had a way of bringing organizations in line and all the areas in line with each other. So this was a major theory. We don't hear about that theory anymore. However, I'll bet most of you in job situations do yearly goal setting or bi-yearly goal setting, and goals are out there. Goal setting is a very intense form of motivation. And if you think about it for yourself, let's say you're an athlete, maybe in sports, and your teams always set goals, or maybe you like to run, or like to do dieting or exercising. You have various goals that you set for yourself. How about Fitbit? That's all about goal setting. So you try and have specific and goals. The goals that are the most motivating are self-set goals. And your goals lead to intensity of effort, persistence of effort, and they lead to task performance. So goal setting is a pretty important way to get at motivating others. And here are different ways that you can foster goal commitment or commitment to goals. Again, we get into rewards, publicity, support, etc. Big thing on goals. Difficult goals are motivate more than easy or moderate goals. Impossible goals are demotivating. So it's for the difficult goals where we're intensely and persistently involved. So the more difficult goals lead to higher performance than easier goals. And more specific goals lead to higher effort than vague goals, like do your best goals. And the goals that have the highest effect are those that you accept, or maybe goals that you participate in setting. If you have a say in the goals that you're going to shoot for, you're going to try and make them happen because what you believe might be on the line. With goal setting, I like the idea of SMART goals. And the textbook talks about this a little bit. And SMART just stands for specific words that get at the goal. S, specific, M, measurable, A, attainable, R, relevant, and T, time frame. If you think about all the goals that you have, do they fit that SMART category? John Kennedy, when he was president, set a goal in 1962. And his goal was that we will put a man on the moon within this decade and return him safely to Earth. That one sentence contained a SMART goal. It was specific, it was measurable, it was attainable, it was relevant, and the time frame was there. If you contrast that with the sentence above it, to be the highest quality space exploration industry in the world doesn't have the same motivational quality as the second one had. So, before I get to this, there's one other area of motivation I want to talk about. And that is the concept of psychological empowerment. It's the fourth area of motivational theory. And I'm going to talk about this a little bit. We're not specifically covering chapter 8 in the textbook, but you might want to go through and read chapter 8 on empowerment and delegation. And the feeling of empowerment can be highly motivating. It's really related to transformational forms of leadership. So in psychological empowerment, what is happening here is we feel empowered when we do meaningful work, when we have some say in the work we're doing, when we feel really competent or self-confident, and we feel really empowered when we see the results of our work. So that's what psychological empowerment means. And what you look at are those various elements in the job. And that type of work environment is probably the type of work environment that most of you listening to this want to work in. So, in the class I asked people to think about job satisfaction. And you think a minute about job satisfaction. What one or two things are you looking for in a job? What one or two things would bring you satisfaction in a job? Take a minute and think about that. There's probably about 15 or 16 characteristics you maybe could come up with. And in studies that have been done, these 5 have come up. These 5 have been identified as maybe the top 5 that lead to high levels of satisfaction. Pay, promotion, supervisor, boss, co-workers, and the work itself that you do. And let me ask you for a minute to rank order these. What do you think? What do you think is going to come out as number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 on the list? What do you think is going to have the highest correlation with satisfaction? Well, highest correlation with job satisfaction happens to be with the work itself that you do. That's a 0.7. That is an extremely strong correlation. And that's why the work itself that you do is very much related to the theory of psychological empowerment. Your coworker and boss are pretty high up there. And think about this a minute. How many of you have had really bad bosses that have led you to leave a job or think seriously about leaving a job? So these 2 characteristics are pretty important. And then there's promotion and pay. By the way, both pay and promotion are very high. Doesn't mean they're not high or not important. It means that we tend to value the work itself that you do higher. Well, taking a look at this satisfaction at the work itself that you do has led to this notion of job characteristics. So if you're looking at the work itself that you do, what is it about the work that you do that brings you so much satisfaction? And here it is. These brown elements, rectangles, have to do with psychological empowerment that I talked about. So what's related to meaningfulness of work? Well, if you do work that has variety, if you do work that has identity, you can identify with what you're doing. And if you do work that's significant, and by that it means it has a great impact, that it's very important for the organization, you name it, all leads to meaningful work. Responsibility for the outcomes ties in with how much autonomy do you have? How much control over things do you have? And then finally, knowledge of results. How much feedback do you get? Do you know the outcome of what you do? Now, all of this assumes that you have the ability, and it also assumes that you want to grow and develop. All of this assumes that you want these things from work or a work environment. Now, what I've included for you in this week's module is a job satisfaction survey. And what this does is this gets at that satisfaction with the work itself. A lot of people take this and like it, so I'd recommend. So if you take this survey, the VISAF gets at all those elements that I was talking about here. All right, so that's in the packet for you with this week's module. So I would take that. So if you look at this whole chapter we've been covering on motivation, here's where we've been. And in this chart here are those 4 theories I've talked about. Effort leads to performance. You have the ability, and do you have goals? Challenging. You're going to get feedback. So these are all things that have to do with that. Is your performance reinforced? Do you get your needs met? Is there fairness? And are your needs, etc., met? If you perform and all this stuff happens, you get satisfaction. That leads to commitment, which leads to effort. And what I've included for you in the handout, a handout on 6 steps for a motivational program that goes along with that chart. And I would say that if you look at each of these 6 steps, if you have a problem with your own motivation, or motivation seems to be a problem in your organization, it's probably going to be with one of these 6 areas. So, in order to have a motivating environment, establish moderately difficult goals that are understood and accepted. And remove personal and organizational objects to performance. Goal-setting theory, empowerment theory, these all tie in there. Then, use rewards and discipline appropriately to extinguish unacceptable behavior and encourage exceptional performance. In other words, expectancy theory, are you getting the type of rewards or outcomes that you want? Number 4 on this list, provide salient incentives. Again, are your outcomes salient, meaning valuable? Are rewards equitable? And then finally, honest feedback on performance. Provide timely rewards and specific, accurate, and honest feedback. So these 6 elements are critical in any organization for satisfaction. And I've placed a handout. I've placed this handout in the module, which goes through those 6 elements. And you can use it with that chart. Use this handout with that chart in PowerPoint. The other handout I had up there is another survey I've made available to you. It's a dominant needs survey that you can answer. And this again goes at when you're looking at needs being fulfilled, here are some common needs that you might have. And are they being fulfilled? That also leads to high levels of motivation. So, if we go back to this integrative model, and I think you'll find this in the textbook, But my 4 theories that I've talked to you about tonight: expectancy theory, goal-setting theory, equity theory, and psychological empowerment. I think those 4 theories probably explain motivation, and that handout on the 6 elements of a motivational program. I think you could use that one page to either find yourself or motivational programs in your organization, and you can find where the shortcomings are. So I hope this has been helpful, and I hope you found this a little more specific on some of the motivation issues that I think are important. The chapter in the book is quite good, as well as the other set of PowerPoints in the module. Thank you.